pivot to Professor Ida Sen, an equally distinguished. I'm always impressed how many things she has accomplished and how many things she takes on. She's a professor of medicine, but navigates the world of mHealth so seamlessly and effortlessly. So, Ina, I'm going to start by asking you the same set of questions, and this time we'll have a little more time. So feel free to jump in and ask Ida your question. So tell us about your journey.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I think whenever we hear about journeys, I always think of the people who are senior to me like, wow, they got there and it's so amazing, and they went from point A to point B. And it turns out that's not true, right? All of us took very, very circuitous journeys, and mine is more circuitous than most, I think. You guys know Isaac Asimov. He's actually wrote a lot of books that were not science fiction. And the two books that he wrote that really resonated with me when I was in 7th grade was a book called The Body and one called The Brain. And it was just amazing. I was just drawn into physiology and biology. I decided I would go to be a geneticist and go to med school. Ended up doing that. And I was very interested in what makes a clinician a good clinician. And I thought for some reason that if I try to teach a computer to be a good doctor, that would force us to really understand what it means to be a good clinician. Now, that may not be true, but that's kind of where I was going with it. So I went to med school at Stanford. I did a primary care internal medicine residency, partly because I'm a generalist at heart. And then after my residency, went back to Stanford and took a master's in informatics, because I was wondering about the power of a computational approach to understanding reasoning in clinical care. And that's actually fundamentally what my interest is in data and reasoning to support the soundest approach to taking care of patients. So out of that, I ended up doing a PhD in informatics because I wanted to do research, and I figured, well, if you're going to do research, you might as well get a PhD so you can be more effective at being funded. And I decided that the area I wanted to focus on was on knowledge bases of clinical research. That ended up being my dissertation, and the implication of the dissertation was that we should capture the results of all clinical trials in a computational database, in a knowledge base. And it was a big vision because, clinical trials are just published in journals, and that's all it is. You can't get at the data. You can't really even get at the study design. So the trial bank idea was what really moved me 20 years ago as I was starting my career. Got my first R1 and actually had a number of grants in that area. I also went to the World Health Organization in Geneva to run the International Clinical Trial Registry platform, which was a policy effort to get clinical trialists and journals and academics to decide to register all trials at the beginning. So if you're going to start a clinical trial, that you declare that you're going to run a clinical trial and what the outcomes are, so that you can't, hide the results. And there's a whole backstory about why that's really important. But that brought together my interest in policy and science, in data sharing, and in reasoning, again, with high integrity. So that was a fascinating experience, going to the World Health Organization and running a global program. And I came back, and really that whole line of research just died off. Really, it just died off because people kept saying, well, no one's going to do that. That's not an R1. How are you going to fund it? If you're going to build this database, what are you going to do with it? Well, I showed what you could do with this, but no one's ever going to build this database. So that's when I decided I would drop that line of work and move to mobile health, because at that time, mobile health was just coming on. So this was about 10 years ago. And really, it's a way to reach out to where our patients are. And it's a great opportunity. We've seen what happened in electronic health records where data is in silos. And I thought, well, what could we do in mobile health that doesn't replicate all the errors that we've had in electronic health records? And so really made a major shift in my career. Met Santosh and joined this project and many others that are in mobile health started a nonprofit called Open mHealth that some of you have heard about. Working with companies in the entrepreneurial space, had a great time. And then about 2 years ago, the whole trial bank idea came back. And actually right now I have another nonprofit called Bibli, and we're building a global trial bank. Microsoft is a major partner. We've got the pharma companies on board, working with journals. We've just raised millions of dollars. So the idea that I had 20 years ago that I thought was dead actually is back. So my career has kind of been all over the place in a sense, but I think if I look back on it and I have to describe point A and point B, I would say that I'm 60% a doctor. You call me. Well, my identity is 60% a primary care clinician, 40% is informatics and data sciences, and then what I'm really passionate about is supporting good clinical care and self-care for people with multiple complex chronic diseases. That's really what I'm fundamentally interested in, and using data and computation and policies to give us the best quality reasoning to do that self-care and care. So that's how at the end of the day, that's how I put everything together. That I went around it in a very sort of circuitous way.
That's very useful. It goes back to my opening comments, is that your career is not going to be very linear. You have to find meaning in what you do, and IDA has found meaning. The expressions have changed over time. Your career will not be this ladder. It will be more like a lattice with many sideway trips, and all along you have to find your opportunities. IDA has been terrific. I didn't realize, but what the point I want to emphasize is there will be transition points where you feel you're falling between the cracks. And when you look at someone like IDA, you see this very articulate, composed, high-achieving person, but then as you see her narrative, there are these periods of self-doubt. So they will come to you, and that's perfectly fine. And as Susan pointed out, you use that as a driver to take you to the next level. That anxiety, that stress is actually good at that phase of your career. Terrific idea. So let me move on to the next question. What excites you about your job?
I like all sorts of things, as you can tell. I'm a generalist at heart, and what I'm doing now just draws on all my wide interests, from data science to ethics to business to policy. It's never a dull day. So that's really great. Obviously, in the meaning and the value at the core of it, I think figure out what really drives you, what's the meaning that will get you up in the morning and keep you focused and working at it through the times when things don't work out for you. I think being as clear as you can on that is good. It doesn't have to be a fixed meaning. It can evolve over time, but I think being clear to that and having something to hold on to, I think is really critical. And the third one, which you can't discount, is just the people that you work with. I'm very, very deliberate in who I work with. There are people who are superstars that I will not work with because it's just not worth my time. There are plenty of wonderful people to work with. I make that a criteria, and it makes life really enjoyable. And of course, I count the MD2K team as part of that.
Clarification. Any questions on this point? Feel free to jump in. I'm only directing the question. So then the flip side, of course, you told us that you don't want to work with the people with the black cloud who suck up 90% of your time. So what are the other things that dismays you about your job as a university professor?
Administration, maybe not as many times as Susan mentioned it. I think funding challenges are obviously, that goes without saying. I think for those of us who are clinicians and continue to see patients, the clinical burdens are huge. There's a lot of, we call ourselves collectivists because we sit there just sort of collecting our electronic health record. I think the structural challenges and barriers that I see in clinical care are very frustrating. We don't do things in a way that's efficient. We make things really hard on ourselves. We make things really hard for patients. And that's just, it's hard to say. There are just so many problems, but gotta start something.
So let me ask you a personal question. So part of the challenge is you live in so many worlds and reconcile so many identities at the same time versus colleagues who are entirely clinical and they only see you 1 day a week, and do they see you as a lesser clinician, or they see you as a lesser evolved practitioner than they are? And is that something you fight with, or?
Yeah, I have the notion of being a hobby doc, because I see patients a half day a week. And it's doubly challenging because I'm a general internist, which means you can come into my practice with any problem, and I should be at the cutting edge of how I should treat you. So that's a that's a full-time job in and of itself. So no, I don't think I'm as good a doc as I really can or should be. But I also practice in a clinic that has very, very high levels of clinical expertise, and I know I hold my own. But I would rather, be better at it. Our division and medical schools differ. We can get to the career path thing. Often people who are in clinical medicine, as they become more successful in research, stop seeing patients. And I'm a rarity in that I still see patients. And it keeps me honest, it keeps me grounded, and it gives me a lot of humility about what works and what doesn't work. And I wouldn't give it up.
Yeah, and I can say that, they're your empathy anchors, because, you're solving a problem, but when it's that patient with hypertension or diabetes in your clinic, so it's a person you're relating to. It's not this abstract construct. So it's a very compelling anchor. So what skills and experiences do you recommend, someone who wants to be a physician scientist, what kind of skills and experiences would you recommend?
Communication. Can't emphasize that enough. I would say that there's so many ways to run, and I know probably many of you are, might not be wanting to go to med school or be a clinician. But I think in the disciplinary world, it's sort of the meta issues, and some of the meta skills I think you should have is really be authentic to yourself. Really, find your own skin, live within it, and be comfortable living with it. And that takes time to develop, but I think being deliberate about that is worthwhile. Staying grounded in real problems, I think, is critical. That goes along with authenticity, both in yourself and in the way you see the world and the way you see problems. And I think necessary for this day and age is to be comfortable with uncertainty and risk. You're just not going to know whether things work out or not. You're just not going to know how things work out. You just got to, be clear about your principles, be clear about your meaning, be kind to yourself, be authentic, make your best choices, and go with it. And cultivate that sense of, I guess, trust in yourself and that comfort with sort of surfing reality as you go along. Yeah.
Thank you. 3 things that you wish you had done as a graduate student, finishing off.
Yeah, so I did a PhD in medical informatics at Stanford. I started with a master's and decided that, to get funded, I needed to get a PhD. Just practical skills that nobody ever taught us. I remember when I was interviewing for a graduate position, for a faculty position, and they would say something like, so what kind of program are you going to build? And it was program not as in a computational program, but a research program. And nobody had ever asked that in graduate school. What was your dissertation? But now they're asking, like, within a medical system, what kind of program? I really didn't know what that meant at all. So I think having a better sense of what a research program is like, what the components of that are, and some of the skills that I did not have any experience with is what it really means to run a lab, what it means to manage a budget, how to hire people. I'm still terrible at hiring people. I hate hiring people. So those skills, operational skills, I think would have been very helpful. And I think getting a little bit more experience in managing up. I think Susan made that point too. That you want to know who's going to write your letters, and later on who's going to be controlling your resources. Who are the people that you need to understand and work with? And that was not something I realized until much
later. And it goes back to the opening comments about, have your story ready. Go through this in your mind. You have to have a clear sense of the value proposition you'll bring to whichever organization or career narrative that you choose. So think about that up front and learn from our mistakes. Common mistakes that people do when choosing your path.
I think this is common to people in research. Those of us who get NIH grads, the R1 is the standard grant mechanism. So if you had sequential R1s and they were like 3 years each, and your career is, let's say, 20, 30 years, there are only so many R1s in your career, if you think about it. And one error I've seen made is that people do a research project because it's doable, or because it's fundable, or because there was a team and they could be part of the team, and so they do that project for 2 or 3 years or whatever, but it wasn't really what they want to do. And then the next time something comes along and it wasn't quite what they wanted to do, but you better just do it. And then after a while you look back in your career and it's been 10 years. You don't have that much time left to do what you really, really want to do. So that is an error that I do see. So be very deliberate about what impact you want to make, and choose your projects to get you there. And I obviously it's hard because you do need to get funded, but don't just do something because it can get funded. Again, being comfortable with uncertainty and risk, I think, helps you to get your ultimate meaning. And then the other thing I see, particularly in medical schools, is that people are in the wrong track. People are in the clinical track or the clinical education track, but they want to do research. Or they're in the research track, but they really, really just want to do, implementation. They want to not discover sort of fundamental truths. They want to take work and apply it to practice. And they're just in an academic track that's not rewarding them for what they really want to do. And that just sets up all kinds of problems that you should avoid from the get-go. So be clear about what you want and negotiate very carefully that the metrics that you're going to be held to are the ones you want to meet. Otherwise, you're just working at cross purposes to yourself.
Perfect. So that leads us to what are the traits of people you think are most successful in your field?
Communication, clarity of communication. Yeah, I got to say that. Flexibility, people who can build partnerships, because it is very multidisciplinary. And then I would say people with integrity, both ethical and moral integrity, and also intellectual integrity. Those are the ones I think really, ultimately.
Yeah, I completely underscore the moral integrity. You have to have a sense of self and what is right and wrong. Times get complex. You can keep coming back to these core values, which you need to map out. Question?
Thanks. So you mentioned flexibility. Could you elaborate on that? Thanks.
Yeah, like I dropped my entire line of research. That's on a big scale. Another way to think about flexibility is that there are fads that come along. There was safety. So for a while, whatever you could pitch as safety, you were more likely to get funded. Now maybe it's precision medicine, right? So you can take a look at where the world is going, be clear about what you're interested in and sort of shift and reframe. And you're still getting to where you want to be. I think flexibility in terms of approach and partners, just being really willing and excited about being wrong. That gets you really far.
I would add to it is you have to be opportunistic. Santosh and I and Emre met 15 years ago in something called the Gene and Environment Initiative. Now, all of us were ambitious. We had no clue what gene and environment, but we wanted to write a grant. Individually, that's how we met. And then next thing we knew, it was mHealth. And then next thing we knew, we were thought leaders. So the point is you just have to be opportunistic and rarely do program announcements come out from NIH that correspond exactly what I need, but I adapt myself. And I go and wrap it gussy it up, but essentially still get to where I need to go, calling it different names. So, be opportunistic. Question?
Thanks for the panel. Thanks, Heather, for your thoughts.
My question was around your earlier mention on that you choose people who you work with properly. And as young researchers, what advice would you give to make that choice? How would you decide this is the right person?
Can you repeat it so it didn't come through? Just
just as a person starting out as a younger researcher, how do you choose people to work with? That's a great question. Certainly talk to people who've worked with them. How would you do that?
I can say. Yeah. So I think what you're asking about is the test. What test do you apply to select which person? So I do not believe that there is a right or wrong person. It's about compatibility. It's about finding the right resonance. So recommendation can help, as can an experience with something pilot or starting out. Having a discussion. So once you start to have discussions, you might get a feel for it.
I would add, you will make mistakes, and you should make mistakes because you learn from them. The next time they'll fall into a certain heuristic, and you get this disquieting feeling because you've experienced that before. But you will have to make your own mistakes. No one, it's experiential. You do your thing, and your intuition will say, this guy's going to suck up. He's not answering my questions directly, not answering my emails. Those are all good indicators. Greg?
This is a follow-up. One thing to think about is how did you pick your advisor or the people you work with? And sometimes you don't have a lot of control over that. But also, as a grad student, you don't just work with your advisor. You often work with students of the same advisor or students of other advisors or other faculty. So you are building some expertise now about what works, and you learn a lot about yourself too in terms of what do you provide that helps or hinders a collaboration, and you'll just give yourself time to reflect on that. What were the good interactions you had, and what role did you play in that? What role did the other individuals play in that, and how could you change it going forward?
It's the wisdom of the crowd, absolutely.
I'm going to jump a few steps forward. So where do you see your career paths going in the next 10 years? Do you have any?
My career path?
Oh, no, career paths in general from your vantage
career paths in general, I think it's an open question because I think medical research has some real structural weaknesses to it, the way that we fund research. The way that I think the physician scientist is an endangered species. It's very, very hard to do clinical care and do research. It takes people a lot of time to get trained, and then people are in debt, and then you can't buy a house, you can't send your kids to school, to a good school. So I'm actually not sure where it's going to go. I don't know. There's some major questions about how this kind of work is going to be funded, I think. But the research opportunities are obviously still there. I think maybe more people will be doing research in industry. I think research may be more applied. That there may be more funding from insurance companies for certain questions, from commercial companies for other kinds of questions. It's going to be a real mix, I think, of how people pursue their careers.
So, and the last question is, what advice would you give to your 30-year-old self?
Given that it was just last year, I
did touch on sort of work life. I think I would tell my 30-year-old self or my 40-year-old self to be more honest in managing responsibilities at home. I think there aren't too many women in the room, but maybe it's true for guys as well, that there are responsibilities at home that you can take on that you think you just have to take on because that's what you're supposed to do. And maybe that's not true, and maybe those should be up for negotiation in a way that's more open. And there are things maybe that you don't need to do. I'm not the room parent. I don't bake cookies. I don't do any of that stuff. But there was still stuff that I did that I probably didn't really need to do. or that I should have negotiated much more about what was my responsibility versus my spouse's responsibility. So I think there needs to be a lot of honesty and a lot of frank discussion about your life partner. And boy, that's a bigger lesson that I would have wanted my younger self to know, and actually my current self.
And I should point out for those of you who are following us on Blue Jeans, that perfect Mr. Mom doesn't exist. Okay, it's only in the magazines. Real life is much more messy, and your spouse, it's a tangle. Sometimes you lead, sometimes the partner leads. So it is a give and take, and no one is perfect, but we do the best we can. So, Ida, thank you so much. I can truly say this was extraordinary, hearing it from someone as accomplished as you. So thank you very much. And of course,